First introduced in Final Fantasy III, summons, aeons, espers, guardian forces, whatever you want to call them, they've always got your back, even in the toughest of battles. And the cool thing is that each summon usually has its own backstory, mythology, or lore. Some summons are based on mythological creatures or figures from various cultures, while others are unique to the Final Fantasy universe. But the problem is, there's so many of them. And in today's video, I want to showcase my personal top 5 summons throughout the Final Fantasy series. And in doing so, I want to dive a little bit deeper into the backgrounds and lore of each summon, as well as notable appearances. Now, before we get to the list, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and leave a comment down below. Let me know your favorite or your personal top 5 summons throughout the Final Fantasy series. Let's go. First up is Ifrit, or Ifrit. Now, I just personally say Ifrit, so we're going to roll with that for this video. Ifrit is commonly depicted as a fiery, demonic creature with a humanoid form. Its appearance often includes flames, horns, and a menacing demeanor. Now, the visual design may vary slightly between different Final Fantasy games, but the fiery theme is a consistent thing. Ifrit's origins can be traced back to the Middle East based on an incredibly powerful type of supernatural demon known as a djinn. They're made out of smoke and fire, which explains the signature Hellfire ability, and can sometimes be bound to a sorcerer or summoner and summoned at will, almost like a fire genie. Now, don't get that mixed up with the Disney genie that we're familiar with. These genies have deep roots in Middle Eastern mythologies and Islamic folklore. Ifrits are said to inhabit the 7 layers of Jahannam. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right, which is essentially the equivalent of hell. Again, explaining the Hellfire attack. Ifrit first appears in Final Fantasy III, but my favorite appearance, however, is in Final Fantasy XVI, with Clive being tied to Ifrit. Clive's relationship with Ifrit and acceptance of Ifrit's place in his journey is nothing short of incredible, in my opinion. Next up is Alexander, the massive mechanical summon commonly associated with the holy element, and it makes sense because Alexander almost looks like a giant church. Now, for Alexander's namesake, well, from what I gather anyway, it was based off of Alexander the Great, and he was a Macedonian king who conquered a bunch of places throughout the world, like Egypt, the Middle East, and parts of Asia in a very, very short period of time. How does this connect to the summon? Well, the city of Babylon was chosen as his capital, and he intended to restore said city, but his death halted the restoration. Babylon was a holy city. You see the connection now? I think in naming the summon Alexander, they did a classic twofer. Name it after Alexander the Great and make it look like a giant city that does a holy-based attack. Pretty clever if you ask me. Alexander first appeared in Final Fantasy VI, and honestly, I think my favorite appearance of Alexander is from this iconic scene here in Final Fantasy IX. It takes a lot to defeat Bahamut, but in this case, Alexander, with the size of a giant floating city, seems to have it covered pretty easily. Coming in at number 3 is the bearded, staff-wielding, and lightning-shooting wise elder Ramuh. He's not actually based on a specific mythological figure that I could find anyway, but is instead supposed to be representative of the idea of a sky god or a storm god. Ramuh's attack, Judgment Bolt, is a flurry of lightning, so his appearance during battle must come as a real shocker. Ramuh falls into the wise old man archetype described by Carl Jung. This is typically represented as a kind or wise elderly father figure who uses what he knows to offer guidance in a way, kind of like a mystical way, to impress upon his audience a sense of who they are and who they might become, almost acting as a mentor. Sound familiar? Something like this is evident in Final Fantasy VI, where Ramuh finds the party by Terra's bedside and tells them a little bit of backstory on the Espers and kind of what they need to do to go progress through the game. And in Final Fantasy IX, you have to undertake Ramuh's trial, in which he recounts the hero's story, which tells the story of Joseph from Final Fantasy II. And more to the point, Ramuh's dominant in Final Fantasy XVI is Cid, and acts as a mentor for Clive in the early stages of the game. Ramuh first appeared in Final Fantasy III, but I'd have to say my favorite appearance of Ramuh is actually in Final Fantasy IX, just purely based on how he fits into the story and the mysticism behind that. Coming in at number 2 on the list is Odin, usually appearing as a demonic-looking knight with horns and riding a horse. Once Odin is summoned into battle, it can often be game over for whatever enemy is on the other side, thanks to Zantetsuken. a powerful attack that has the potential to instantly defeat all enemies. Odin clearly derives from Norse mythology, bearing a Viking-like helmet, and has been referred to as a god of death and a god of war. And Odin is one of the most revered Norse gods and is a patriarch of sorts, said to rule the realm of Asgard. Now, I really enjoy Norse mythology, actually. I think it's really cool and very interesting. And Odin is a name that often is featured within Norse mythology, but you'll also hear other names like Thor, Freya, and Loki, kind of names that have been made a little bit more popular recently thanks to Marvel films. I know Marvel did a lot of this stuff before Final Fantasy summons were even a thing, but I gotta say Final Fantasy is just a little bit cooler. Odin first appeared in Final Fantasy III, but I feel like my favorite appearance throughout the series was actually in Final Fantasy XVI, given a bit more personality with Barnabas and his thirst for power, war, and destruction. In my opinion, it's a really cool take on Odin and drives home that Odin is really the god of war and death. And coming in at number 1 on my list is Knights of the Round, obviously based on medieval literature. Knights of the Round is a very lengthy and elaborate summon where 13 knights attack the enemies in sequence. Each knight deals substantial damage, making it one of the most powerful summon abilities in the game. The entire animation takes a significant amount of time to complete as well. Obtaining Knights of the Round involves a challenging side quest. Players need to breed and raise a special chocobo, the Gold Chocobo, which can walk anywhere, including the ocean. This chocobo allows access to the hidden island called the Round Island, where the Knights of the Round materia is found. The process of obtaining the Gold Chocobo involves breeding different colored chocobos with specific abilities and racing them to improve their stats. Ultimately, you need a chocobo that can travel across mountains, which is the green chocobo, cross rivers, which is the blue chocobo, and traverse oceans, which is the black chocobo. And by breeding and raising these chocobos, you can eventually obtain the gold chocobo. Now, Knights of the Round summon animation is one of the longest in the game in Final Fantasy VII, and its power is reflected by this duration. The sequence involves each knight delivering a powerful attack to the enemies. I like Knights of the Round purely because it draws from the literal Knights of the Round table, that medieval, mythological, Excalibur kind of stuff, which is kind of referenced in the earlier Final Fantasy titles, making it a little bit more sweet. There it is, my personal top 5 summons in Final Fantasy. Kind of your stock standard Final Fantasy boomer tier list, but hey, that's just me. I guess I'm a Final Fantasy boomer. But the one thing is, I feel like I learned a little bit more delving into the histories of each summon. Pretty cool. If you enjoyed the video, hey, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and comment down below. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on my list, as well as your personal lists of your favorite summons throughout the Final Fantasy games as well. Anyway, enough rambling. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We'll see you again on the next episode. Ta-da.